So what I want to do now is I want to start the second session off by introducing you to our next speaker, Paul Wilkinson, who I've known for many, many years in various guises, whether that's through Commit, whether that's through through ICE, Bentley, through the NEMA, as they're called now. Lots of different organisations we bump into each other. Paul is a highly respected and accomplished professional in the field of construction technology and communication. With over 30 years of experience in the industry, he is widely recognised as an expert in construction collaboration technologies, social media, and digital communications. You're wondering where that bio came from, Paul, aren't you?
ChatGPT.
Yeah, it was artificial intelligence, which is incredible. They got it all right. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Paul for the next session.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here to talk about interoperability, in particular about poor interoperability, which has been an endemic issue for almost as long as I've been in the industry, I think. I recall talking with Mark Bew, who later became chair of the UK BIM task force back in 2003 at an International Alliance for Interoperability event at the Royal Institution of British Architects. About a year after that, this document came out, the NIST report. This was an American study that conservatively estimated that poor interoperability cost US industry $15 billion a year. These were costs that arose from avoiding poor interoperability, mitigating poor interoperability, or delays arising from poor interoperability. By interoperability here, we're talking about the ability to exchange and use information. So, you export information from your application, but somebody can't import it into theirs. That's a simple process. So I've been focused on this activity now for a couple of decades. The costs here of poor interoperability reflected on the slide. You can sort of see poor interoperability adds to project costs, it adds to project schedules. It also takes up an inordinate amount of individual professionals' time. Some civil servants, as a consequence of our inability to deliver consistent information, 60 to 80% of their time is used in resolving those issues. So we did a bit of a survey last year, the Government and Industry Interoperability Group. We collected some data. The thickness of the red bar is an indication of the issues that we were addressing. People had challenges in accessing information held in proprietary formats. They had issues in accessing and reusing information created with old or different versions of software. They had costs from exchanging, accessing and using information in the wrong formats, and they were wasting time, lots due to working with information held in proprietary formats. Some examples. One business had increased staff turnover because the people concerned were just frustrated at the amount of time they spent simply manipulating files, and it was boring. Duplication of work. One business estimated it spent $1.25 million over 7 years on repeat surveys and reproducing information because of poor information quality and poor interoperability. One business was commissioned simply to transfer information from one proprietary platform to another. And they said themselves, there should be no need for us to do this. So these are the challenges we're facing. With these problems in mind, we aimed, as the Construction Playbook puts it, to support greater sharing of better data and deliver better whole life outcomes. We wanted to work with industry partners on developing a code of practice that would meet the kind of British standards definition of what a code of practice is. It's about creating foundations for good to guide industry, reflect current good practice as undertaken by competent and conscientious practitioners. And one of the reasons I'm here today is this work is also foundational to the creation and management of digital twins. It enables the built asset information to be more easily interrogated without access to the originating tool sets that we use to create the data. Audiences that we were addressing, technology providers are an obvious one. They create tools. In many cases, historically, we use these tools to create deliverables. We didn't think about their ability to exchange them. We just wanted to deliver paper more quickly in the early days. When we wanted to start exchanging electronic information, it became more challenging. So we're dealing with a legacy issue across the industry. And we're dealing with a legacy issue, in some cases, Max and I were talking earlier, 2 decades after other industries have tackled the same problem. We're tackling this also with asset owner operators' needs in mind. They're procurers of information, and often also technology buyers and users themselves. They're the ones who often end up having to deal with the poor interoperability challenges. And of course, we've got supply chain professionals. They've got obligations to create and provide information to asset owner operators. So our focus was very much on how do we exchange and use information across contract lines? How do we mandate it as a condition of contract that you provide interoperable information? Our secondary audiences included membership bodies, educational groups, and industry regulators, because things like the Golden Thread are going to be enabled by some of the work that we've been doing. With those 3 main groups, our working group comprised half of them were technology providers, a quarter were owner operators, and the remaining quarter came from the supply chain. So we're very keen to bring industry expertise to bear on this in proportion to this group. The context here, there is a huge amount of guidance. We've produced reports, and this is just the last 5 years of, as you look at it, on the right-hand side, digital data and technology guidance, playbooks, national geospatial strategies, open standards principles, digital strategies, so on and so forth. On the left-hand side, we've got the value toolkit, TIP roadmap to 2030 that Alex mentioned earlier on, construction playbook, so on and so forth, right down to data for the public good and building a safer future in the context of the Golden Thread. So this was very much about driving the process forward and building on what's already been done. From that context, and also thinking through some of what was coming from industry in terms of we need more open standards, we need better adoption of APIs, clients wanting better data control, ownership and management of their own data, and they need to avoid vendor lock-in. That sets some direction. So we're not in the process of creating detailed technical standards, IES4 type things. It's not about ontologies and taxonomies. This is about delivering some practical steps that people can take in the here and now based on what industry practice already exists. So, we decided we needed to underpin interoperability with some key principles that are written in plain language and easily understood. So things like longevity, security, again stressed this morning, data ownership, value, and competition, all written into this work. We consulted heavily. There's a lot of public engagement. We started stakeholder engagement at the beginning of last year, ran it through the year, right through to a consultation phase in January of this year. So we ran a consultation period for 4 weeks. We had over 500 visits to the platform. 300 people took part in the consultation in the end, and there was strong positive support for the core principles and the supporting requirements that we wrote into the document. We had 117 written comments, and the comments were aggregated, anonymized, shared then with the group, and a consensus was reached about which ones to include. On the basis, again, sticking with the point that we needed to keep practical advice, not boil the ocean or not dive deeply into detailed technical solutions. So about a third of the comments resulted in changes to the draft code, and the main areas of comment are shown in the examples. We had people wanted to clarify what we meant about longevity. So, can we still access the information, for example, for warranty, regulatory, professional indemnity insurance purposes? There was a need to greater stress use of whole life data. So talk a bit more about ISO 19650 Part 3 trigger events was written in, and security has been re-emphasized. And we clarified the language also on open standards. It's easy to lapse into talking about open data, open source, and open standards, not knowing that there's sometimes subtle differences between the three things. So our core principle is interoperability, sort of defined on the screen. And the important bit is that information should be independent of the technologies or services used to produce or process it. So this means, you're not reliant upon the originating solution, whether we're talking about BIM authoring or whether we're talking about geospatial data, whether we're talking about exchange of information from surveys, all sorts of information covered in our remit. The 5 underpinning principles. Longevity is about that long-term findability, access, and reuse of asset-related information. That longevity, particularly for asset owner-operators, is key to helping them maintain and enhance the ongoing value and resilience of their estates and of their information. We've obviously got to protect security, confidentiality, and privacy. Information value is key. It's about enhancing the value of information that we create, not about reducing its value as it deteriorates over time. It's about ensuring enduring ownership and control by owner-operators of information about their assets, and also about promoting fair competition between technology providers and between the supply chain users of the tech. And for all 6 principles, we've created a set of technical requirements against them. So if you download the document, and I'll share a download link at the end, this is the context. We've got some sections which give more detail about each principle, explain its importance, relate it to particular policy requirements. Then we explain what the policy means for technology providers. And then the related technical requirements are detailed along with some footnote links so that people can find the associated supporting guidance. There are around 20 technical requirements against those principles, and they're spread across. So some of them apply to more than one. I can't go through all of them in detail, but for each one, the working group drew on existing guidance, for example, from the Central Digital and Data Office's Technology Code of Practice, UK BIM Framework, or other established good practice across government and across industry. The longevity grouping reflects the need to have reliable, assured data which retains its integrity and can be trusted. With trusted data, great things happen, is a phrase that we've used in NEMA. So that's really what we're focused on here. And the security grouping is underpinned by requirements from, for example, National Cybersecurity Centre and the National Protective Security Authority, previously CPNI. So the Interoperability Code of Practice, you can see here, outlines what the technology providers should do. Ensure their products or services support the exchange of non-proprietary information without loss, amendment, misinterpretation, or additional work for users, so that the integrity and value of information is not compromised. That's quite clear and explicit, I think. And we identified a couple of areas: open standard formats and schemas, and that we included some examples in there, but this is not exhaustive. This is about creating some basic foundational points to help the industry move forward. And we did the same in relation to APIs. I'll rattle through the remaining 5 quite quickly, but you'll see the same thing. We have a principle. We set out what the technology providers should be doing in relation, in this instance, to longevity. And perhaps the most important aspect in relation to this one in particular is the golden thread point of view. But also we reiterate the need for information to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. These are FAIR principles. You can read up on the FAIR principles, and it's something the Geospatial Commission is writing into its code of practice at the moment. Security, covered, as I mentioned, through National Cybersecurity Centre and the successor, the newly named CPNI and so on. So we have items here in the technical requirements about authorization, authentication, user rights and permissions, and so forth, things you wouldn't expect, I think. Information ownership. This is very much about creating information as an organisational knowledge asset. You know, this is something that then could be reflected on the balance sheet of organisations and is then ascertained to have value. And it's about ensuring that technology providers help asset owner operators to assert and secure unrestricted ownership and control of their asset-related information, not being held hostage, not vendor lock-in in either of these instances. And the same pretty much applies on information value here. It's about helping contracting authorities maximize the value of information deliverables. And that means lean delivery, I think. It's not about complicated processes in transferring information between systems. Anytime you've got to do a complex process, it's not adding value. It's friction, to use a phrase that again was used this morning. And particularly when providing long-term information management services, the technology providers should be maintaining the value of that information. It means not compromising its integrity, ensuring its continued availability for reuse. And finally, the competition point. This is very much about supporting industry bodies in being able to make choices between different solutions, not being locked into particular products or locked into particular product upgrade cycles as well. So this is very much about supporting also the supply chain. So they don't need to have a particular technology in order to deliver a service to a client. They are free to use whichever solution best suits their organisation and their organisation's budget. The impact that we had when we first launched was evident from some of the feedback we got both in trade press, both anecdotally fed back to us through the feedback from the consultation process. And we started also an engagement with Build UK about including the code as part of a question in the Common Assessment Standard. So this will be something that contractors will be asked about in procurement processes. And we've started also to talk with international organisations about whether this might, for example, become part of a flex standard or part of something that could be written into other guidance, maybe as part of the UK BIM framework. So the launch took place on the 17th of April at the Institution of Civil Engineers, and I described it as the end of the beginning. So we've got next steps. We want to expand awareness of the code. We want to provide a means for people to sign up to and support the code, and that includes procurers particularly. We think procurement is the strong engine to drive and mandate this down the supply chains. So we need to provide mechanisms to help people sign up to the code. We're looking to capture experience and industry feedback on its adoption so we can develop the code still further. Thinking about an assessment process so people can understand the extent to which solutions support their interoperable information needs. And really moving forward in terms of connecting with related initiatives, and that might include IES, for example, and exploring international dimensions on this. So that is the link to access the draft code. As you'll see, it's part of a page on the UK BIM framework. The gig is being reconstituted as a social enterprise under the NEMA banner. And so the content that we have created as the gig is currently available. It's being reviewed for potential inclusion in the UK BIM framework set of documentation and associated guidance. So I hope you'll take time to go and have a look at that, explore it. And we are very keen that people follow up on the process and perhaps getting involved in the process of stewarding the code going forward, promoting it to industry, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.